In this video, I would like to revisit one of the items from the Test 3 study checklist down here under Material, number 6, the third bullet, why it is important to separate net interest on the income statement into interest paid and interest earned. And this is to set us up to work on our group project, this concept. One of the things we run into is a lot of companies just report a net interest on their income statement. So let's use Apple as an example. Let's come over here and just Google Apple 10K and see what we can find. And it looks like the end of October they filed a 10K. We'll open the PDF version of that. Go down to about the third page where people usually put their table of contents and look at the financial statements. And the first one that pops up is the consolidated statement of operations. That's a fancy word for income statement. And they give us sales, cost of goods sold, operating expenses to get to an operating income. And the only thing I can see on here that even looks like interest is this other income or expense, net. And so the second most important thing in a 10K, besides the financial statements, is the notes to those statements. But before I look for the note to that line item, let's note the numbers here, 1807, 2005, and 2745. Then, if we search the notes to the financial statements, we'll find a note number 4 that talks about consolidated financial statement details. And this just takes a bit of flipping through the pages here to find those numbers that we were interested in. They were 1807, 2005, and 2745. And this note gives us a breakdown on those numbers. It gives us the interest and dividend income. We can think of that as our interest earned. Our interest expense, we can think of that as the interest paid on our debt. And then it lumps some other things in here, other income and expense net. We can ignore those safely. Again, this is all beyond test 3 when we talk about this kind of stuff, but this is oscillating between a positive and a negative number. So let's just focus on the top two, the interest earned and the interest paid, and then think about the net interest. If we try to put those into our template that we've been playing with, we could use that net interest income, and I've actually gone back and picked up an extra year of history here and a couple more on the balance sheet. But these are our familiar numbers, the 1807, the 2005, and the 2745. And it's tempting for students when they do their group project to look only at net interest income and say, well, if I would just compare that to net cash, then I could get some kind of a net interest income as a percent of net cash. How might I get net cash? I would have to find the cash and the debt and net the two. And we didn't look at the balance sheet, but if we did, we wouldn't see cash and debt as single line items. We'd see about 3 different things that we could add up to get cash. I won't take you through that before test 3. And about 3 different things we could add up to get debt. And so the question here for the purpose of this video is, do we use the net interest income that we were given on the income statement and compare that to this net cash that I just calculated? Or do we try to break it down a bit? And of course the answer is we try to break it down a bit, but let's think about why. If we calculate a ratio of what is the net interest income divided by the average net cash, we actually get a pretty decent number, 1.8, 1.5, 1.6. It would be tempting to use 1.6, for example, carry that forward. And then let's say that our cash and our debt didn't change. So in each of these, I'm just going to say equals a prior, Control Enter to populate that all. Probably should have done all 3. Well, we'll say here cash minus debt gives me net cash. And I'm just hard coding these. Control R to copy, I guess. I'm just hard coding these. cash and debt, of course in our big model we have more elaborate ways of predicting cash and debt, but for the purpose of what I'm trying to show up here, we're just going to do it this way. And so we could actually forecast our net interest income as this percent times the average of these numbers and get a reasonable answer. Net interest has been running about $2 million, and it looks like it would run about 1.5 if we went forward with these numbers. Let's go back to the 10K and let's think about breaking that net interest into interest earned and interest paid, because I think that's what the line item says on the study sheet. Why is it important to separate net interest into interest earned and interest paid? And so if we did that, our 1807 would get broken into 4961 and 3576. And again, I'd like you to ignore this extra miscellaneous stuff. Let's do that here. Let's unhide these two. Break that 1807 into 4961 and 3576. Make sure I got those numbers right. I did. And what if we had gone to more work here and done this early when we were doing our forecasting? We could have actually calculated the earnings rate as the interest earned over the average cash, and the borrowing rate as the interest paid over the average debt. And then we would have a couple of numbers that we could forecast going forward. And we could forecast our interest earned independently of our debt. I think I can copy that formula. Looks like it copied well. And I've said a couple of times we're just going to forecast these as 0. And now let's say in our model that we assumed that we wanted 0 net debt. In other words, we're going to let our debt creep up to the amount of cash that we had on hand. So I'm going to copy this value, paste it here as a value. Now look what happens. Our first approach to this is just predicting net interest income would be that we have 0 interest because we have 0 net debt. But in reality, what happens? We have a lower earnings rate than we do a borrowing rate. So even though cash is the same as debt, we're going to earn less interest than we pay. And so the proper way to get this net interest income would be the interest earned plus the interest paid. And it would show that if we find ourselves in a 0 net debt position, we're actually going to be spending a reasonable amount on interest. And so that's why it's important to break these things down into components.